Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Maverick News Channel. Tariffs, trade war, and Donald Trump's big bluff. I think it's likely a bluff. Some other people, reluctant to say that, but yeah, it's a big bluff. So stay calm, carry on. It's going to be okay. It's all part of the show. We're going to get into the whole tariff thing tonight. And a few other things. I know that the World Series is on tonight as well, so we'll keep an eye on that. And we have a lot to unpack. Big issue, the decision by Donald Trump to terminate trade talks with Canada because Doug Ford cheated by running an advertisement. Was it fair? Was it in context or out of context? We'll get into it. We'll show you. You can decide for yourself. I'm going to unpack it all with you. We're going to do it together right here as we dig into today's top news stories.
The information war is raging. Truth without integrity is worth nothing. Maverick News. Because those who have power and those who seek it must be held accountable.
The world is watching.
Join our family of truth seekers. Donate today and add your voice to the chorus of Maverick Knights. Donate at maverickdonations.com. Truth. Integrity. It's the Maverick way. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Dominating the news cycle, dominating the headlines today, he is Donald Trump. And we usually don't get into a Truth Social scroll until later in the broadcast, but tonight, right off the top, to show you what some people are calling a Donald Trump tariff tantrum. And I think it's not far from the truth. See, he's heading into a legal battle. The Supreme Court will rule soon on whether his tariffs are constitutional, whether he has engaged in government overreach. Wouldn't that be a concept for some of the freedom people and MAGA types to explore in the context of Donald Trump himself? Oh no, but he is the anointed one. He's the deity. He's the political Moses. You can't criticize DJT or you have Donald Trump derangement syndrome. Oh, you sheep. Here he is on Truth Social, acting like a petulant child. The stock market is stronger than ever before because of tariffs. Oh, really? Oh, okay. The United States is wealthy, he says, powerful and nationally secure again, all because of tariffs. The most important case ever is in the United States Supreme Court. God bless America. Yeah, it's pretty important. We'll see how you fare. He may prevail. It depends on how scared the justices are of the political persecution that Trump is engaging in as he tries to purge the entire system of his political opponents. And we may be able to illustrate that for you in greater fashion I'll maybe be able to get into that a little bit tonight. We'll see. But the larger issue here at hand is the tariffs, and specifically as they relate to Canada. Doug Ford, the Ontario government, and this $75 million ad campaign that was initiated by Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario. And he ran an ad using the voice, like actual clips from the Reagan Library video of Ronald Reagan, who was by and large a free trader and was generally speaking opposed to the use of tariffs. So Donald Trump says that running an ad like that is cheating. He says right here, Canada cheated and got caught. What? Then he says they fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs, when actually he loved tariffs for his country and its national security. Canada is trying illegally influence the United States Supreme Court. In one of the most important rulings in the history of our country, Canada has long cheated on tariffs, charging our farmers as much as 400%. Now they and other countries can't take advantage of the U.S. any longer. Thank you to Ronald Reagan Foundation for exposing this fraud. Make America great again. Oh my God. He knows most people never read past the headline. He knows probably 98% of the people out there don't know the difference between a deficit and a debt. He knows that when it comes to political finance, what it takes to run a government, how a budget is put together, how tariffs even work, that the vast majority of people are clueless. So he can tell you pretty much anything you want. And if you haven't been to school to learn about economics, which most people in school say, oh, that's boring. I'm going to sleep through this class. And now here it is haunting you in a very real way, because you may lose your job. Without really understanding why, thinking that the real person to blame is Doug Ford. What an idiot that guy is. Why did he run an ad? Look at what he did. It's not Doug Ford's fault. It's not Mark Carney's fault. It's not Justin Trudeau's fault. It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault up here. It's certainly not Ronald Reagan's fault. It's really one guy and the people around him following through on what they view as a revolution, a MAGA revolution, a populist nationalist revolution, MAGA, which is what it has devolved into, a mean-spirited, zero-sum political ideology, or at least approach to a political ideology that is threatening to stagnate the economy, while he tells people that the economy is better, stronger, producing more jobs, producing more revenue than ever. In reality, inflation is up. A lot of people are losing their jobs. I mean, look at just the jobs cut on the government side alone. I mean, you can argue if that can lead to greater efficiencies, fair enough, and maybe you're going to make up for that in the private sector. But one way or another, that's a big hit to the economy. So the economy is not where it's supposed to be at. That's when the jobs numbers came out, the lady that was in charge of putting those numbers out into the public, he didn't like the numbers, so he just fired her. He literally, in a manner of speaking, he shot the messenger. I don't like that. You're not supposed to tell people the truth. You're fired. So it's like a reality show, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. What was that show called? The Apprentice. He went around firing everybody. Well, now over on Fox, this is how this all begins to unfold. This was a little earlier in the day today. Fox Business Live. Here we go.
On Truth Social, quote, the Ronald Reagan Foundation has just announced that Canada has fraudulently used an advertisement He goes on to say that they only did this to interfere with the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court and other courts. Tariffs are very important to the national security and economy of the USA. Based on their egregious behavior, all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated, writes the president. The Supreme Court will take up President Trump's tariffs in less than 2 weeks, a hearing that the president himself said that he may attend. That's happening on November 5th. May very well set the tone for markets and the economy. Joining me now is the Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum. Secretary, it's great to happening. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Maria. Great to be with you as always.
Well, your reaction to this issue now with Canada, I mean, this upcoming Supreme Court hearing is clearly incredibly important to the president. He may very well attend that hearing. And if it goes the wrong way against President Trump, the U.S. is going to have to be on the hook to give back all that tariff revenue, isn't it?
Well, this is a very important case, but I'm confident that President Trump is going to come out on the right side on this thing. I think it's clear that he has the authority to be able to execute on this tariff strategy. And as he said, and as you've seen as the market's reacting, finally, after decades and decades balancing trade, leveling the playing field with countries that have taken advantage of the United States, critically important.
Yes, exactly. So we'll be waiting to see how that goes. Meanwhile, we've got this government shutdown going into day.
Okay, enough. Enough. You want to see the ad? Let's start there. Well, not start. We started with Maria there over on Fox News. And Trump saying he's terminated. Ended. Terminated. Done. Gonzo. It's over. No more trade talks with Canada. Oh, I see. So you're just not going to do trade with us anymore, eh? Okay. Right. Here's the ad that Doug Ford and the Ontario government ran.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. Throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
Yep. Trump saying that was taken out of context. The Reagan Library also accusing Trump of doing that. I think he posts that on here somewhere. But it is not taken out of context. It was used fairly. Let me see if I can find the... we had it here. I'm going to take a short break while I cue this up. It's important. You should see it.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
All right, before we get into that, just because we just ran the full ad, right? 60 seconds in length, standard 60-second TV commercial, which now Ford, by the way, says he is going to stop running after this weekend, but he wants it to run this weekend during the World Series. And I know that this ad also was targeted. I wasn't even aware of it. I'd heard some rumblings or something, but I didn't realize it had started running. Didn't really know that it had, because it's the ad buy for $75 million is on the U.S. side. And it has been running in Republican states, and it has been running in Washington. And that's why Trump saw it, and that's why he got his feathers ruffled. Well, but he's really just, I think, looking for an excuse, any kind of pretext to attack Canada at this point. So let's take a look at the full address from Ronald Reagan in 1987. This was a program he used to do on a regular basis. This is from the Reagan Library. April 25th, 1987. This is the full thing. And some people are saying they're giving you the full video, and they're not. Some of them are not. They're saying, go watch the full video. It's right here. And then they're still only showing you a portion of it. You watch this, and then you can decide with this and all the other information we're given tonight, was Ronald Reagan in favor of, generally speaking, was he in favor of or against the use of tariffs? Here we go.
My fellow Americans, Prime Minister Nakasone of Japan will be visiting me here at the White House next week. It's an important visit because while I expect to take up our relations with our good friend Japan, which overall remain excellent, recent disagreements between our two countries on the issue of trade will also be high on our agenda. As perhaps you've heard, last week I placed new duties on some Japanese products in response to Japan's inability to enforce their trade agreement with us on electronic devices called semiconductors. Now, imposing such tariffs or trade barriers and restrictions of any kind are steps that I am loath to take, and in a moment I'll mention the sound economic reasons for this, that over the long run such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. But the Japanese semiconductors were a special case. We had clear evidence that Japanese companies were engaging in unfair trade practices that violated an agreement between Japan and the United States. We expect our trading partners to live up to their agreements. As I've often said, our commitment to free trade is also a commitment to fair trade. But in imposing these tariffs, we were just trying to deal with a particular problem, not begin a trade war. So next week, I'll be giving Prime Minister Nakasone this same message. We want to continue to work cooperatively on trade problems and want very much to lift these trade restrictions as soon as evidence permits. We want to do this because we feel both Japan and the United States have an obligation to promote the prosperity and economic development that only free trade can bring. Now, that message of free trade is one I conveyed to Canada's leaders a few weeks ago, and it was warmly received there. Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. Now, there are sound historical reasons for this. For those of us who lived through the Great Depression, the memory of the suffering it caused is deep and searing. And today, many economic analysts and historians argue that high tariff legislation passed back in that period, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, greatly deepened the Depression and prevented economic recovery. You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity. Now, it hasn't always been easy. There are those in the Congress, just as there were back in the 30s, who want to go for the quick political advantage, who risk America's prosperity for the sake of a short-term appeal to some special interest group, who forget that more than 5 million American jobs are directly tied to the foreign export business, and additional millions are tied to imports. Well, I've never forgotten those jobs, and on trade issues, by and large, we've done well. In certain select cases, like the Japanese semiconductors, we've taken steps to stop unfair practices against American products, but we've still maintained our basic long-term commitment to free trade and economic growth. So, with my meeting with Prime Minister Nakasone and the Venice Economic Summit coming up, it's terribly important not to restrict a president's options in such trade dealings with foreign governments. Unfortunately, some in the Congress are trying to do exactly that. I'll keep you informed on this dangerous legislation because it's just another form of protectionism, and I may need your help to stop it. Remember, America's jobs and growth are at stake. Until next week, thanks for listening, and God bless you.
See, okay. In certain circumstances, tariffs are a tool. But he was not in favor of tariffs as an overall economic policy. He understood and used it, that tariffs could be used in a targeted way to achieve a particular objective, not always an objective that was economic. Trump isn't using the tariffs for economic reasons primarily. He's using tariffs as a tool to achieve other things, like I'm going to force that country to come to the negotiating table to talk peace and end a war. So he'll impose tariffs. And you have to be clear-eyed about that. It's not just about economics. It's that Trump has other objectives. So he applies pressure using tariffs on countries to get what he wants. What does he want from Canada? Everything. More from Canada than probably any other country. He wants to make Canada the 51st state, if possible. If not, he'll take as much as he can get, because to him, everything is always a zero-sum game. Now, here's Reagan, as we just played him, saying he's not in favor of tariffs only in certain very, targeted circumstances are tariffs a useful tool. And some people who are accusing Doug Ford of taking things out of context are actually the ones taking what he says out of context. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here's Keith Wilson, lawyer, separatist, anti-Canadian Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms guy from out in Alberta, who I've become less and less impressed with over the last couple of years. What's he saying? Why is Trump upset with Premier Ford? Ontario's government cut a clip of President Reagan praising presidential tariff powers, then spent $75 million on a U.S. ad campaign, misrepresenting him to attack President Trump. Watch what they clipped out here. Alberta should not have to suffer the consequences of stupid decisions of Ontario politicians. Alberta deserves better. Yeah, you're a political opportunist there, Keith. And you're the one taking this out of context. Let's play the clip that he says Doug Ford omitted on purpose to take Reagan out of context. Then I'm going to explain.
Well, I've never forgotten those jobs. And on trade issues, by and large, we've done well. In certain select cases, like the Japanese semiconductors, we've taken steps to stop unfair practices against American products. But we've still maintained our basic long-term commitment to free trade and economic growth. So, with my meeting with Prime Minister Nakasone and the Venice Economic Summit coming up, it's terribly important not to restrict a president's options in such trade dealings with foreign governments. Unfortunately, some in the Congress are trying to do exactly that. I'll keep you informed on this dangerous legislation because it's just another form of protectionism, and I may need your help to stop it.
Right. It's another form of protectionism because, well, Keith Wilson and some others, including Viva Fry tonight, who deserves to be called out on this as well, frankly. What they're trying to do is make you think, they're twisting this around in your mind with the way they're presenting it, making you think that Reagan was in favor of tariffs because Doug Ford took it out of context. And back in 87, Congress was trying to take away his power to use tariffs. There's like a little grain of truth at the center of that, but it's not that. It's not really quite accurate. In fact, it's not accurate at all. Because what was really going on at the time was Reagan didn't want tariffs, doesn't believe in tariffs, didn't want to use tariffs. He did use tariffs in certain circumstances, and he had used tariffs against Japan. The United States was using tariffs against Japan because of the semiconductor trade issue. So in 87, what we had basically going on, and all through the mid-1980s, actually, the United States was facing this big trade imbalance with Japan, particularly in high-tech sectors like semiconductors, microchips, which are essential for electronics, computers, military applications. So you've got national security concerns there, not just economic concerns. And Japan's dominance in producing dynamic random access memory, or DRAM chips, which they, today we have better ones than they did back then, but still in the 80s, computers a huge concern in the economy and for national security. Technology, they used it in everything from computers back then to defense systems, as they do today, and this threatened U.S. industry competitiveness. So American firms like Intel and Texas Instruments accused Japanese competitors like Toshiba, NEC, Hitachi, others of predatory practices, including selling chips below production cost. They were dumping chips, that's called dumping, into the US and third country markets to capture market share. And that limits, and while they were doing that, they were also limiting foreign access to Japan's domestic market through non-tariff barriers like restrictive distribution networks. How do they sell below cost? Government subsidies sometimes. They have other reasons for doing such things, sometimes in order to squeeze out competition, so that after you put someone out of business, for instance, then when your competitor is squeezed out of a market and then you dominate, you can then jack your prices up high later. There are a lot of different reasons why a country or an industry might even do that kind of thing. But this all led to a series of unfair trade practice investigations. So it evolved from there. And basically, Reagan was, had tariffs on the table. He didn't really want to use tariffs. And some members of Congress and a lot of Republicans actually were at the time trying to lock him in to using tariffs. And Reagan didn't want that. What he wanted was to be able to go into the negotiations with Japan with tariffs being a possibility, with tariffs being one tool that he could still have in his toolkit that he could reach into and use as a threat against Japan if necessary during the negotiations. But he didn't want legislation to lock him into using tariffs at the time. So that's what he's referring to in that address. But if you're someone like Keith Wilson who wants to break the country up, Canada, this is a cue from Captain 51st State in the White House saying, go get them, boys. Here's the next information warfare nugget that you can all feast upon. Now go to town. And so we're seeing that online tonight with these influencers and political activists who are actively working through the information ecosystem to amplify Trump's voice, amplify his misinformation, and try to reframe the whole argument, which now is swirling around Ronald Reagan and his famous address from 1987, where he is clearly talking against tariffs. And it's not the only time. Reagan spoke many times against the use of tariffs. But they're not being honest with you, nor is the Reagan Presidential Foundation. They're also engaging in misdirection, half-truths, false or fake threats even. They're not happy because they got called out, and people are upset because Doug Ford told the truth. The ad from Ontario is very much in context. Here's the statement from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, which says here, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute learned that the government of Ontario, Canada, created an ad campaign using selective audio and video of President Ronald Reagan delivering his radio address to the nation on free and fair trade dated April 25th, 1987. So we ran you the ad, then we ran you the full statement. If you think that Ronald Reagan, after listening to the full thing, was a big tariff fan, then you're just not listening. It says here, the ad misrepresents the presidential radio address, and the government of Ontario did not seek nor receive permission to use and edit the remarks. What? I'm going to show you what that's all about. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute is reviewing its legal options in this matter. We encourage you to watch President Reagan's unedited video on our YouTube channel. Well, I just played you the whole video from their YouTube channel, and I guess because they want everyone to get permission before they run the clips, I guess they're going to have to sue me too. Have at it, boys. Go ahead, sue me too. I ran the clip, so have a lot of other people. Probably millions of other people running that clip on social media tonight. Go ahead, sue me, sue Doug Ford, sue everybody you want. You know why? You're going to lose, baby. You're going to lose in court. This is BS. The arguments coming from the Trump side, BS. They're the ones taking Reagan out of context. They're the ones making up this fake threat against Doug Ford. Oh, it's a threat of sorts because they're like, we're terminating our talks with Canada. That's from Trump. And the Reagan Library, the Reagan Presidential Foundation, you didn't get our permission. You don't need your permission because you've already given it. Let me show you. All you have to do, you can find this elsewhere, but you can go to the YouTube video on their channel and you will see this. Now, I already know that this stuff is public domain because this kind of government generated multimedia content is always public domain in the United States. It's public property. It says right here, access restrictions, unrestricted. This is in the YouTube description on that very video. Use restrictions, unrestricted, right there. They do ask you to give them credit, but the truth of the matter is they've given you access to it so that anybody can use this for pretty much any purpose. But they want you to think that they own it, and therefore you have to get permission. And if you don't, they're going to sue you for damages. Any material generated through government, like all the stuff from the White House that comes out every day, all those news conferences, all the stuff coming from those government channels, not say stuff that necessarily from like CNN or Fox News, but all the stuff from the government side, that's all free access. That's all in the public domain, which means there's no copyright. You can just use it. And that's what Doug Ford did. That's what the provincial government in Canada did in Ontario. They've used public domain, government generated content. It's for the public. It's produced by the people, for the people, with the people's tax dollars. To suggest otherwise is just lying. Oh, there's some of that going on here for sure. Lots. Lots of it. Reagan did not want his options limited by Congress in 1987 as he was going into those negotiations. He wanted to be able to negotiate flexibly with Japan. Not completely rejecting tariffs, as he knows that tariffs can be used as a tool, but not a sledgehammer to kill a fly. He preferred targeted, discretionary actions like the 100% tariffs he imposed on $300 million of Japanese electronics for violating the 1986 semiconductor agreement over broad, congressionally mandated protectionism. There was this thing called the Gephardt Amendment, and it automatically triggered, would have automatically triggered and curtailed his ability to use diplomacy, voluntary agreements, or selective pressure to achieve fair trade without sparking wider trade wars. In short, Congress wasn't just pushing Reagan toward tariffs. It was trying to lock Reagan into using them with less room for strategic maneuvering. And he argued back then that that could harm the U.S. economic interests by escalating tensions and inviting retaliation. So when you have people like Keith Wilson and Viva Frei and some others out there saying, see, this proves that this 55-second clip proves that he's actually in favor of tariffs, even though he spent the majority of this 5-minute address saying he's against them. No, they're messing with your head. Or they don't know. And they're buying into it because somebody fed it to them. But both of those guys, lawyers, they're pretty swift. They know what they're doing. They're just tools themselves of the MAGA revolution on the Canadian side. Although, Viva Frei, like many of the others, where are they? They're in the United States right now. Mr. Sunshine, baby, he's down there too. He's here shitting. Sorry, did I use a bad word? Oh my God. I'm sorry, but this guy really pisses me off. I'm so sick of this guy. Liar, conflator, exaggerator, traitor. Posting tonight, oh, it's all over for Canada. Canada's done. Where is he? He's in Hawaii, talking about how much he loves the United States and how Canada is so screwed.
That it's $75 million. The fat pig with rabies in Ontario spent $75 million on
Fat pig with rabies. That's how he describes Doug Ford. Yeah, this is really highbrow intellectual stuff. Thanks. I don't need to listen to you anymore. You have nothing of value to contribute. Goodbye, Mr. Doom and Gloom. So tired of this negative bullshit. Even Trump himself in this clip saying that he would have done the same damn thing as Doug Ford if the shoe had been on the other foot. Listen to this brief clip highlighted out of what he said. This is taken from the CTV clips.
I even see foreign countries now that we are doing very well with taking ads. Don't go with tariffs. They're taking ads. I saw an ad last night from Canada. If I was Canada, I'd take that same ad also. But they're actually on television taking ads. But I do believe that everybody's too smart for that. I even see...
He would have done it himself.
They're actually on television taking ads. But I do believe that everybody's too smart for that. Canada. If I was Canada, I'd take that same ad also.
He'd take that same ad also. He'd take that same ad also. He'd do the same damn thing. And yet he's saying we cheated. He's so full of crap himself. It's all just a game. It's theater. He's bluffing. He's not going to just terminate the trade talks with Canada. He's not. Can't. It's a bluff. Here he is. He's saying he's terminating all trade negotiations with Canada today in response to this $75 million anti-tariff advertising campaign. So they began running, I guess, back on the 15th of this month. And yeah, it uses this address from Reagan. And yeah, it does have to be clipped to fit into a 60-second spot, but it's not taken out of context. Not at all. It's very accurate, actually. Very reflective of how Reagan viewed tariffs. Trump is calling the ad fake and fraudulent. I had a good friend who called today and says, I don't know, it's maybe Trump, maybe it was all fake, maybe it's all AI. That's part of the problem too, because Trump has unleashed with Elon Musk this tsunami of BS, especially through platforms like Twitter, where people are being fed truth and a bunch of fabricated crap, which I showed you last night on Truthspiracies. One video after another, where some of them hard to even tell if they're true or not true. Case in point, the one, I need to make it very clear that the video, because I think there was some confusion over this last night, the video of the guy filling up the bed of his pickup truck with gasoline and a tarp in it, and then a person coming out of the gas station saying, sir, don't do that, you're going to cause a big accident. That was all fake, by the way. Like just about everything else I showed you last night, a few real true things in there, but Clinton in the White House with Monica Lewinsky and the cigar and the music, that was all fake. Oh, Elvis, Stargate Elvis, that was all fake, just so you know. Yeah, that whole thing was fake. That was just clickbait. And it's been around for quite a while. I thought it was pretty obvious to people. I thought, some people would just realize, but I guess not everybody, even with that, understood that was a setup. Anyway, you've got this threat from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. They're looking at their legal options, right? Well, the talks, these talks are ongoing bilateral discussions really about the USMCA framework to address Trump's tariff plan. And he's gone, pretty heavy duty on autos, steel, aluminum right now. But these aren't full renegotiations. We're going to have bigger negotiations coming up into next year surrounding the United States, Mexico, Canada trade agreement, free trade agreement. And what he's really doing here is he's trying to apply more pressure as we go into those longer term or more consequential negotiations, not just about these tariffs. All of this stuff will be addressed when it comes time to renegotiate the USMCA in a full way. And so I think this is, when I assess it and listen to a lot of other people, I think this is pretty much a high stakes bluff. At the end of the day, he's just getting everybody kind of jacked up, ramped up, upset. And this is not the first time he has done it. I remember, because I'm old, I'm a moldy, and I'm an oldie, but I'm a goldie. And maybe that's why God has called me to counterbalance Trump's golden age rhetoric as he embarks upon this tariff journey. But I remember back about 7 years ago when Rush Limbaugh was still with us, and I used to listen to him all the time, like every day. And Limbaugh, if you listen to him, he'll say, I'm always free market all the way, because Limbaugh was a true conservative, or truer conservative than Trump is. Trump is not a conservative. Trump is a populist nationalist, or a nationalist populist. I sometimes call them neo-populists. This is not conservatism. This is Trump and a national populist movement that has taken over the Republican Party. But you go back 7 years ago, during Trump 1.0, it was a different flavor of politics at that time. And but even so, Trump was still using back then tariffs as a tool. He was just surrounded by people who kind of kept him in check and reined him in. Now Trump 2.0, it's a different story. But go back 7 years ago. This is Rush Limbaugh addressing this exact issue as it unfolded, as they were going into negotiations to renegotiate what? The North American Free Trade Agreement at the time.
Tariffs are for sure going to go through. That seemed to be the main push point of the conversation.
Well, you know, it was a campaign promise. And it's all related to trade deals. And Trump thinks that we are just botching trade deals left and right, and we're losing still our rear ends in these things. And he's in his mind, and what he says, it's all about helping the American consumer. I think this is an uneducated, I think. This is a wild guess, I think. But my wild guess here is that what's really going on is that Trump is trying to apply pressure on Canada and Mexico for serious renegotiation of NAFTA. And I think the tariffs are a threat that's being... I don't doubt that he's serious about them. They are a campaign promise. Let's see, we have grab soundbite number... Nope, it's going to be 26. We'll get to it after the break.
Okay, so he gets into a little bit more of it in the program afterward, but it's just a little too disjointed for me to forward and blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. That's why you come here, to get the most intellectual of discussions as we discuss blah, blah, blah. Well, that's what this is. Honestly, it's blah, blah, blah. It's bluster. It's a bluff. He's applying pressure. Don't panic. It's far from over. It's just beginning, unfortunately. And as we wade through all of this, there's going to be a lot of disruption. This time around, a little bit different. Well, actually a lot different, because Trump is far more serious about using tariffs and has been using them. But as I say, he's not using them just for economic reasons. He's using them for political reasons, to get things he wants from countries. End this war, stop this trade practice. And he has gone to war with the rest of the, well, we would say the right-wing political revolution that's happening globally on a global scale. And he is the leader of that through MAGA. And they've initiated a war on liberalism, is the way they characterize it. And that's what this is all about as well. You've got a liberal government in Canada, Carney at the helm. He hated Trudeau, but Carney's more conservative than Trudeau was. They like each other because of Carney's background in finance and the private sector and business, and he knows the business world and how economics work. So he has more respect for Carney, none for Trudeau. So it's better to have Carney in there. But he doesn't care at the end of the day, because he's a brute. He's a predator. Especially when it comes to trade, he's a zero-sum guy. He believes, only in winning. He doesn't really believe that there can be mutual benefit from conducting a transaction. He just has to win, and that means beating you. He doesn't understand that real benefit, the most benefit, comes from mutually beneficial trade deals. I buy something from you because what I'm buying is of the correct value that you're selling it to me from, and we can engage in a trade. And we both win. You get money, I get whatever it is you sell me. But to Trump, it's like, I have to get this guy down. I don't want to pay market value. I don't want to pay this guy what he's worth. I'll pay less. I got to screw this guy. That's what's going on here largely too. Screw us. And he'd like to just, he's so predatory that he wants to go beyond all of this and actually take the whole country. And he says, it won't even cost you anything. All you have to do is just give me your whole country, your sovereignty. It's not my imagination. I'm not the only one saying it. Many out there saying it. I've been warning about it for a long time. I really began to clue in when they started to just talk about it a little bit more in the open, when Tucker Carlson came to Canada, out into Western Canada, into Alberta, of course, and then phoned Justin Trudeau's office and said he was coming to Canada to liberate us. I said, oh, wait a minute. He's not joking. Everyone, oh, he's such a joker. He ain't joking. This is real. You go back, you check the video. I did. I called it out. And it's been true and unfolding at a rapid pace ever since. And they've got the whole team activated, and that includes some Canuckistanians who have sold out. And they're on Team Trump. And they're benefiting in ways that we won't even get into tonight. And that's why they don't like me. Rick, you're a liberal. Oh, am I really? Yeah. Well, there's especially one guy out there who keeps saying that. And he's gone on a little campaign to try and smear me with a liberal label. I could be called worse, dude. A lot worse. I'll tell you what I'm not. I'm no longer a Trump MAGA guy because I'm not a sheep. And I think for myself because I'm a maverick. And I'll be right back.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarmingly, some media outlets publishing things they simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
In an ocean of lies a century deep, the truth awaits. Choose not the red pill. Choose not the blue pill. For both are an illusion. Discover the power of M. The power of individuality. We are mavericks. We are the way to the light. Fear not the storm. Join our quest for truth. Truth will set you free. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, so I'm going to pivot back here just a moment to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, and I'll explain why you're getting this sort of fake threat of legal action, which is bullshit. You're getting it because of this dude, David Trulio, appointed by Donald Trump. Because what has been going on, he's been purging all of the institutions of political opposition and appointing Trump friendlies into all of these positions so that they take over every level of government, of the bureaucracy, of culture, of education, because they saw that people on the left side of the political spectrum had been doing that very thing in their own way for a long time. You know, integrating their political ideology into the fabric of our country through our institutions, policing, libraries, the arts, culture, schools, universities. It just went on and on and on. And so you've got this culture creep and culture capture of institutions. Well, they're doing it back. But this is not, the kind of Republican conservatism that I became used to and identified with through the 80s and even the 90s, right? Through Reagan. This is not Reagan conservatism. This is neo-populism or nationalist populism. Some characterize that as a form of fascism, and there is certainly that element to it. Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation names David V. Trulio as its new CEO. Who is he? He served in a couple of different roles during the first Trump administration. He's also worked in aerospace, defense and government, and will lead the nonprofit foundation, it says here, that raises funds for the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum. So he's a Trump plant there to do Donald Trump's will. So Ford runs the ad out of Ontario. Trulio gets the call. He puts out the social media response. Next thing you know, it turns into a new skirmish in the ongoing trade war online through the information warfare ecosystem. Here's Peter Schiff. Now, this guy is a pretty darn conservative economist, and I do listen to him from time to time. I like a lot of what he says, a lot of what he stands for. You don't believe me when I tell you that Donald Trump is not a Republican, that he's not really a conservative, that he's nothing like Ronald Reagan? Don't take it from me, take it from Peter.
And then he ran against Carter in 1980, and he did what Barry Goldwater failed to do. He won, and he won in a landslide.
Talking about Reagan.
And so ever since then, that's kind of been, the Reagan party, right? So if you look at that, right, if you're going to be true to Ronald Reagan, and everybody wants to pay homage to Ronald Reagan because he's still very popular today among the Republicans, right? Donald Trump likes to claim he's like Ronald Reagan. Well, he's nothing like Ronald Reagan. And one of the ways he's nothing like Ronald Reagan is when it comes to trade. Ronald Reagan would not support anything that the president is doing, despite the fact that he's trying to spin it the other way, or they got the Reagan Library is coming out. Now I guess they put some pressure to say, oh, this is a fake ad. It's not fake. I mean, yes, they didn't use the entire speech because they had to cut it down because they have to, there's a 60 seconds or however long the ad is. But what the sympathy that they are showing is 100% accurate. Ronald Reagan was a staunch supporter of free trade. And he knew that protectionism didn't work, that it would backfire, that it would harm the very workers that it claims to help, and that it would harm all consumers, including the workers who are themselves consumers, right? Every worker is a consumer, but they're all made worse by protectionism. And, of course, Donald Trump is very upset that these ads are running, and so now he doesn't want to talk to the Canadians because they've been running these ads. He's trying to claim that Ronald Reagan would support his agenda, and there's nothing that he's doing right now that Ronald Reagan would support. In fact, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, and now the Trump administration is denying it, but, it's probably true. But that they were thinking about investing something like $10 million a pop in a handful of quantum computing companies. The government was going to take this money and invest it in these private companies, which, again, is totally unconstitutional. There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that authorizes the U.S. government to make investments in private companies on behalf of the U.S. government. That's not what the government's there to do. The government's not supposed to invest our money. We're supposed to invest our own money, right? I mean, there's a huge difference between a private individual investing their own money, and the government investing taxpayer money. First of all, when a private individual invests money, they don't want to lose it. It's their money. And therefore, they're going to be guided by, a profit and loss, motive. And that's a good thing, because if an investment is profitable, meaning that it can generate returns that exceed its costs, it is a good use of scarce resources, and it is a net positive for society, because the business that you are investing in is able to utilize those resources in a way that more value is created than the resources that are consumed. Because any resources that are used in one business venture are resources that can't be used in another. And so they need to be allocated to their highest and best use. And the only way to do that is by profit and loss, right? You know that you're doing good if you make a profit. You're doing bad if you generate a loss. And sometimes you need to generate losses in the short run to make profits in the long run, but that is a judgment call, and it needs to be made in the private sector by people who have skin in the game. But when you let the government invest taxpayer money, what the hell does Donald Trump care if the taxpayers lose $10 million in an investment? It's not his money, right? So he's not going to scrutinize the legitimacy of the investment the same way he would as a private citizen investing his own money. So it's much more likely that the government will get it wrong. So that's why the government shouldn't do it, right? If an investment is worth funding, it will attract funding in the private sector because people will want to invest in the company.
Exactly. And, Peter can go on and on about this. It's very true what he's saying. This is where I'm at, generally speaking, with economic arguments. I'm very much a free market guy. I do generally believe in free trade. I don't like tariffs, generally speaking. And I'm totally on board with what Peter Schiff is talking about here. What I also understand, though, is that in certain targeted instances, a tariff might serve a purpose. So Reagan also saying, hey, Congress, don't limit me back in 1987. Let me keep that as an option in my tool bag as we negotiate. And if I need to pull it out of my toolkit, then I'll use it. But I'd like to avoid it at all, as a last resort to achieve something. In Canada, for instance, Trump saying, oh, they take advantage of us. They steal our jobs. Case in point, and this is the one that keeps coming up, the dairy industry. And that's why I keep showing you the price of milk, comparing the U.S. price to the Canadian price of milk. Sometimes we just go online, as you know, we compare, say, Detroit to Windsor. What's the cost of milk? Because we have supply side management and tariffs in place on the Canadian side for the dairy industry in this country, and different tariff mechanisms and agreements in place or trade barriers, even between provinces. So it varies from like Ontario to Quebec. Milk prices quite a bit higher in Quebec because of the way they administer their supply management programs. But that being said, even in Canada, those tariffs are used in a targeted way for specific reasons that are not always reasons surrounding economics. In the case of milk, for instance, it's to protect small farmers, small farming operations from the threat of massive U.S. agricultural corporations from coming up here and swallowing up smaller Canadian-owned farm operations. That's the logic behind it, because we as a country, our government, over a long time and through a lot of debate, which is still ongoing, and maybe it will be changed in the future. And I have in the past actually advocated for the elimination of the supply side management systems and milk marketing boards, which cap production in Canada, because I've seen the advantages that can come from free trade. That being said, the reason it is done on the Canadian side is because we're trying to protect small farmers and protect food sovereignty, which is to say, make sure that we have the ability to feed ourselves, which is for Canada the way we deal with a national security issue, to make sure everyone is fed. So that we could, for instance, if we integrated our agriculture with the United States and companies were completely owned by U.S. companies or dominated, majority held by U.S. companies, they would then control our food supply. And if, for instance, you got someone in the White House who maybe wanted to make Canada the 51st state, not that that would ever happen, but if it ever did, they might then be able to shut down food production in Canada, to use that as a weapon against us, to squeeze us, to force us to give up our country, to give up our sovereignty and become part of another country without ever having to fire a shot in a kinetic war, apply pressure, or to get other things from us, to take our wealth, to take our jobs, to take all of these things from Canada, to make Canada not Canada anymore. And it's food sovereignty for Canada. Other sectors include like culture, movies, and not so much movies, but even more specifically, broadcasting, because we live right next door to the United States. We're flooded with U.S. media constantly, and we allow that to flow into the country. So we're bombarded with U.S. culture, U.S. history. Talk to any Canadian, very confused about our own history, mixing Canadian and U.S. history up. And a lot of it weaves into each other for sure, because we've coexisted all through history. But our history, our culture is distinctively different in many, many ways from what you get in the United States. We're just different. And so in order to tell Canadian stories to Canadians, broadcasting is another area that we've had, and the internet, we've had some tariff and non-tariff barriers erected in order to make sure that we have an industry, have a news business up here, have the ability to have people at least make a living, and maintain television stations, radio stations, newspapers, and now even things online, so that there's at least some sort of funding out there to allow us to tell Canadian stories to Canadians. So it's not, those tariffs aren't there just for economic reasons. They're there for other reasons. Selective, targeted sectors where though that's used as a tool to achieve something other than just an economic outcome. Trump doesn't like that. He's saying, screw you. We want access to your dairy industry or your poultry industry, which is what I've been talking about with regard to what's going on with the ostriches out in Edgewood, BC. That's a big part of it. They want access to our agriculture, to our farms. They want to take our farms over. They want U.S. corporations. Donald Trump's big corporate buddies want access to the Canadian market so they can swallow up our businesses, our farms, even maybe our mines, take over our oil industry in an even larger way than they have. It's always been a pressure point since the discovery of oil out in Alberta. And so we're in trouble, is what it comes down to. But we're a lot stronger than people think. We're a lot stronger than some of these sellouts would have you believe. Donald Trump doesn't want to use kinetic force to take over the country. He wants you to overthrow the government, essentially, by becoming disruptive, by undermining support for the government, by scaring the shit out of you with his threats of, I'm terminating all trade negotiations with Canada because Doug Ford ran an advertisement. Really? Wow. So Doug Ford cheated, did he? What a crybaby. Isn't the United States supposed to be the most powerful economy in the world? Isn't the United States supposed to be the economic leader for the whole globe? Isn't he supposed to be at the helm of the most powerful nation on earth? And one ad using Ronald Reagan's own words in context, accurately. That is such a threat to Donald Trump that he throws a temper tantrum. He says, I'm not talking to you anymore. He's a chicken. He's afraid. He's bluffing. Milton Friedman, great economist, especially if you're on the conservative side. If you're a real conservative, not a fake conservative, not somebody part of a sort of a co-opted, captured, rebranded, aberrated version of conservatism, when you're really a socialist. Milton Friedman on tariffs. Let me bring you the godfather of conservative economics, There, I just made that up. I don't know if I'm the first, but it just came to mind. Free trader against tariffs for sure.
Reagan put this very well once in a speech he gave in San Francisco, in which he said, you know, let's suppose three of us are out in a boat in the ocean. And one of the fellows in there takes out a gun and shoots holes in the bottom of the boat. Is it the sensible thing for the others of us to do, to take out our guns and shoot more holes in the bottom of the boat? That's kind of a silly notion, isn't it? But yet that is exactly the notion of protection and retaliation. Suppose Japan and Europe do, and they do, no question, impose protectionist tariffs. That hurts them, it hurts us. If we turn around and impose protectionist tariffs on them in retaliation, all we do is to hurt ourselves some more and to hurt them some more. That we're just shooting additional holes in the bottom of the boat. It doesn't make any sense. The best thing in the world would be for all countries to engage in free trade. But even if other countries don't, then the sensible, rational thing for us to do, all by ourselves, after all, we're the great leader of the free world. We're not simply a camp follower. The idea of our going around and imposing quotas on imports from Hong Kong and from Singapore and from all those other terribly threatening countries, it seems to me it's just demeaning and degrading for a great power to engage in acts like that. So in my opinion, the right course of action for the United States would be unilaterally to get rid of its restrictions and say to the world, come and sell your goods here. We're delighted to sell to you. We're delighted to buy from you. We're delighted to sell to you. President Reagan put this very well once in a speech he gave in San Francisco, in which he said,
okay. So he's right. Generally speaking, he is right. Reagan looked at tariffs like you're blowing holes in the bottom of your boat, which is very true because it makes everything more expensive, much less efficient. And when you get retaliatory tariffs put in place by countries that get upset with you, now you're both blowing holes in the boat. Everybody's losing. There's really no way to win in a tariff war. That's why on the Canadian side, they're not negotiating in public. Publicly, initially, they were imposing some retaliatory tariffs. But then a lot of that stuff has been backed off quietly. It was done for optics up front. Canada has actually backed off on a lot of that stuff, heading into, hopefully, productive negotiations later with the USMCA as all this unfolds. But, you know, a lot of this, I remember back, I'm so old, even back in the 1970s, Lee Iacocca, who used to work for Ford. Then he went over to Chrysler as the CEO. And when Chrysler was going bankrupt, he went to the United States government and Canada for a bailout. They got a loan. And it was because they were facing so much competition at the time from Japan. And then there was all this pressure to put tariffs on Japanese automakers at the time. Lee Iacocca didn't view Japan as being a country engaging in fair trade practices at the time because they were viewed as dumping. China also dumps. Back to the milk thing in Canada. Canada, this is why the argument from Trump doesn't hold water on the milk argument. It not only doesn't hold water, it doesn't hold milk because Canada doesn't dump milk into the U.S. market. We really don't dump. We don't export very much in terms of dairy products to the United States. We are just focused on our own country, producing our own milk for our own food supply primarily. It's just that Trump wants access to it so he can give his rich buddies access to the market so they can buy stuff up, put smaller farmers out of business by swallowing them up and get richer than they already are. Back in the 1970s, Chrysler was in trouble because what was going on was the Japanese were producing more fuel efficient cars, better quality cars than American auto companies were. Gas prices went up. Japanese cars were far more fuel efficient. The big three, GM, Ford, Chrysler, they all got caught in the gas crunch because their cars were gas guzzlers. So more people bought more and more Japanese vehicles. The big three couldn't compete. Chrysler, being the smallest of the bunch, was going bankrupt. So tariffs were put in place to try to protect the big three. But really all that happened as a result of all that was the big three, because tariffs became basically a tax on the consumer on the US side. If you wanted to buy a Japanese car, any dealer importing Japanese cars had to pay a tariff on every car that was imported into the US. As those cars came into the US, that then became more expensive. So what did the big three do to respond to that? They actually increased their prices, but did not increase their quality to the level that it should have been increased in order to become more competitive. They continued to produce gas guzzlers because they didn't pivot fast enough to the market. Chrysler then went basically bankrupt and had to go to the government cap in hand. And this is back 1979. I played this stuff before.
Hey, now you pay.
Here's Iacocca saying you got to save Chrysler because too many jobs at stake. If we're too big to fail, essentially, if you let us go down, America's in trouble.
Pay now or you pay later.
You're now asking the government to risk $1.5 billion of the taxpayers' money?
I think that you're trying to put a con on us. The kings of industry that really know how to make the thing hum, they told you to get lost.
I think the decisions ought to be made in Detroit, not in Washington.
Well, in fact, we don't have a free enterprise system in this country.
Well, what can we do about it? But they accept what they offer.
Either that or no job.
We're going to have no choice.
It's freeze time, boys. We're the working people. We're the working people. We're the working people. We're the working people. We're the working.
Yeah. Working people, middle class. That's what's at the heart of the whole MAGA movement, too, the whole MAGA revolution. That's fine. It's class warfare, but it's more than that. It's a culture war. It's all predicated, the whole MAGA movement, the war on liberalism, it's all centering around the culture war. And that's why I keep saying, too, Trump not using tariffs strictly as an economic tool. He's using it as a sledgehammer to get other things, not just an economic outcome. Steve Bannon talking about this. So, really wide open. You want to know kind of where they're at with all of this and then the MAGA movement? He's a knowledgeable guy, and has been, certainly during Trump 1.0, an advisor. He's not part of the administration now. Pardoned for some of the indiscretions that he became involved with. Pardoned by Trump, out of jail. And talking here with Zanny Minton, editor-in-chief, and Zanny Minton Beddoes, editor-in-chief at The Economist, and deputy editor Ed Carr. And he says this is a revolution that we are witnessing here. We're going through this, and they ain't stopping. So don't think that this is the end of the line. Trump is using this as a tool, as Limbaugh pointed out, but Bannon is explaining here, if you really listen to him, you'll hear that this is different. This is a revolution.
To warn people. Do you think if we calm things down, they're going to stop? What planet are you living on? This is my problem with this whole concept of liberal debate. We're in a revolutionary time, both technologically, geopolitically, right? Financially. You're talking, in this magazine, you tell me we're heading to financial Armageddon. There's no other way you can read this. Hang on. If you don't warn people about it and say, we must go to the ramparts, because if you're just passive and docile and just flick the channel and watch the National Football League and go to Taylor Swift concerts, it's over. You need to rally people to say, no, you represent from time immemorial, from every patriot's grave back to the beginning, the basic working man and woman that has always saved this country in moments of crisis, in the Revolution, in the Civil War, in the Great Depression, World War II. It's always come back to the little guy. This is the fourth turning. The strength of the populist nationalist MAGA movement in this country is we're anti-fragile. We're resilient. You can give us your best shot. You can put us in prison. You can take our credit cards away. You can debank us. You can deplatform us. You can have all the tech stuff that happened. We can't be beaten if we don't quit. And if that takes hot rhetoric, you ain't seen nothing yet, because we're now getting into the middle of this fight, and we're never gonna kowtow to these people. We're never gonna get on our knees to these people. We're never gonna apologize. We're never gonna say we're sorry. All we care about is victory begets victory begets victory, and we know that we're ascendant and they're in decline.
So, Steve, when you look at history and you map the lessons of history onto the situation today, the crisis we're in today.
This video was created by AI.
Not the Bannon interview. Here we go.
The only way through this crisis is through some sort of conflagration, and if so, do you think your role is to accelerate that, to bring it out so that it happens fast and you come out on the other side better and faster, or is it to stop? Is it to stop the crisis? Is it a belief that actually, you know what, we can work to stop the crisis, and actually change is better brought about through evolution rather than revolution?
This was not evolution. I think that to avoid actual civil conflict, which I think you're seeing right now, the beginning of the harbinger of it, if you want to stop that, you have to bind together tighter. We, as a populist nationalist movement, as a MAGA movement, we need to do like the redistricting fights. We need to get, this is why I was down in Texas, we need to get the House in a situation that is permanently defendable by the MAGA movement, right? So it's a blocking mechanism. And take that, like I said, you move a maximalist strategy with a sense of urgency, and you seize the institutions. And that's what we're doing right
Steve,
now.
I don't see how that is a recipe for diffusing this crisis. I think that what happens is when people feel shut out of power and interest groups cannot get representation and cannot get an input into the way that policy is made, that's precisely when you end up with civil war.
I disagree.
Because there is no alternative.
Because I think the mechanism will be that people in the Democratic Party will adjust and change, say, hey, we actually have to start winning elections, and we have to have a message that can resonate with many Americans, that we can start getting back control of the House of Representatives, we can take the Senate, and most importantly, we can take the presidency. I think you'll see I think that you'll force the Civil War to be inside of those guys, and they'll say, these radicals are saying violence, and we have to seize the institutions, seize them, and then purge them. We seize the institution, purge them, and that's why you've got guys, it's not the Doge crap. This is serious people like Russ Vought and others that have spent years thinking this whole plan through. We must strike.
The Reagan Foundation.
I know all the haters hate it, but this is the age of Trump. He's totally redefined politics and power in America. And how did he do that? With no political training, because he was a populist and he was a nationalist at the very moment that if you didn't have populist nationalism stopped the managed decline of the country by the elites of the nation.
And does he need a third term in order to see that job through?
Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president in 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is, but there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28. We had longer odds in 16 and longer odds in 24 than we got in 28. And President Trump will be the president of the United States, and the country needs him to be president of the United States. We have to finish what we started. And the way we finish it through Trump. Trump is a vehicle, I know this will drive you guys crazy, but he's a vehicle of divine providence. He's an instrument. He's very imperfect. He's not churchy, not particularly religious, but he's an instrument of divine will. And you can tell this of how he's pulled this off. We need him for at least one more term, right? And he'll get that in 28.
At least.
You're not driving me.
At least one more term. You see, they're not joking. That's hyperbole. The 51st state stuff. It's hyperbole. No, it's not. They are dead serious. They just haven't been saying the quiet part out loud. And the quiet part before was unspoken. You had to sort of peel back layers to really kind of figure things out. A lot of stuff didn't make sense. Stuff doesn't make sense now, still, largely. But when you start to hear the quiet part being spoken out loud, then things start to line up. Now you're beginning to really understand. So when you hear people in Canada saying they would prefer for Canada to be a republic or a province to become a republic, that's not accidental. It's not just grabbing some phrase out of thin air. It's a very real thing. Time for everybody to wake up. When you're listening to these online influencers, and you are free in this country to advocate for Canada becoming the 51st state if you so choose. But I don't like deception. I don't like people cloaking their true intent, misleading people so that they take them down a deep, dark hole. I like people to be truthful, honest, and transparent when they are recruiting people for a cause. The least you can do is tell them what the real cause is. But why would you do that? Or not do it? Maybe because in the beginning it wouldn't be so palatable, so popular. You have to kind of ease them into it, take them down a road, a little bit at a time. And then at the right moment, you kind of just spring it on them. He wasn't joking. He's not joking now. He wants Canada to be the 51st state. And he's using tariffs as one of the ways to apply pressure, not just for a better USMCA, but to just take the whole enchilada because he thinks he can do it. Take over the country. But he wants you to do it for him. He wants you to do his dirty work for him. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book. Destabilize the population, get them upset, squeeze people, starve them. Starve people in that country, get people angry so they'll blame their own government and even blame themselves. And then the very person or entity that is creating the problem suddenly presents the solution. The man causing all of your grief comes to you and says, all you have to do is just give me everything you have. Because Donald Trump is not a free trader, and he sure as hell isn't a fair trader. He's a predator. And he is the one, and the people around him, who have been taking Ronald Reagan out of context. And even people, my American friends who I spoke to today, gullible, impressionable, easily misled, don't know their history. Even people who say that they're big Reagan fans don't even know really what Ronald Reagan stood for in terms of economics or trade. That speech in 1987 was not the only time he said these things, where he was against tariffs and was largely a free trader. This is 1988, March 12th, 1988. I'm going to use this clip from the Reagan Presidential Foundation and Library too, so they can, I guess, sue me twice for using public domain material. Don't take my word for it. Take it from Reagan himself. Love that 80s hair. Not AI. This is real. For sure. Right from the archives.
10 seconds, mic's on. Stand by.
My fellow Americans, I'd like to talk to you today about our nation's trade policy. I can't think of a recent economic issue that has generated more heat and less light, yet has more importance to our long-term national interest than trade. Throughout the 7 years I've been in office, professional doomsayers have latched onto one issue after another as evidence of an American decline. They can't seem to acknowledge the obvious good news that surrounds us: the low inflation, the over 15 million new jobs since November 1982, and the longest peacetime economic expansion of the century. Trade is only the most recent subject of lamentation by our critics. For them, our trade deficit is an excuse for getting the government more involved in private business decisions. They say that Americans can't compete with foreign workers, so we should slow imports by erecting protectionist trade barriers. As usual, the doom merchants are wrong. The U.S. economy remains the most dynamic and exciting one on the globe. Our entrepreneurs, our can-do spirit, and our economic freedom are the envy of the world. The pessimism used to justify protectionism is totally unfounded. Let's clear up a few myths. First, the trade situation is improving far more quickly than people realize. Economists may disagree on the impact of the trade imbalance, but there is no disagreement that there has been a remarkable turnaround in the real trade deficit. Since the third quarter of 1986, the merchandise trade deficit in real terms has declined 18%. And over the past 15 months, the volume of exports has grown over 4 times as fast as the volume of imports. Clearly, we are in an export boom. American industries, particularly manufacturers, are setting records. Unfortunately, there's a threat to all this good news. I'm talking about the trade bill pending in Congress. Adopting protectionist measures and starting trade wars now would be like closing the barn door just as the horse is trying to get back in. The best way to keep our exports growing is to keep international trade expanding. And that brings me to another myth, that Congress can pass a law that will reduce the trade deficit without destroying our prosperity. Legislation can reduce a trade deficit only if it reduces economic activity. If people are not working, they're not trading. We had a trade surplus and 25% unemployment in the Great Depression. A protectionist trade bill is a serious threat to our export boom. It's a serious threat to the millions of American jobs that depend upon international trade. It is filled with scores of provisions that are protectionist and defeatist. My veto pen is ready if the final bill remains anti-trade, anti-consumer, anti-jobs, and anti-growth. However, the administration is willing to work diligently with Congress to produce a bill that would increase our international competitiveness and complement our efforts to promote trade, exports, jobs, and productivity, not stymie them. All those working on the bill should take a deep breath, take another look at the trade outlet, and work together in a constructive spirit. It is still possible to write a bill that I can sign. Indeed, I'm encouraged by reports on the status of the trade bill negotiations. The conference committee working on the final draft of the bill has already eliminated a number of troublesome provisions, including illegal quotas, budget-busting giveaways, and protectionist measures. Many objectionable provisions remain, including proposed procedural changes in the law, but I'm hopeful that in the next phase these will be jettisoned. Only wholesale elimination of many of the existing items will produce a bill I can sign. Regardless of whether I sign trade legislation this year, we will continue our free and fair approach to trade policy. We will challenge unfair trade practices of other countries in order to achieve a level playing field for American industries. We will negotiate to knock down trade barriers on a bilateral or multilateral basis. In that regard, we will seek early enactment of the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement and push for concrete progress in the upcoming Uruguay round of trade negotiations. Finally, we will continue to coordinate economic policies with our major trading partners, thereby helping to maintain a favorable international climate for trade expansion. America's open market is its great strength, not its weakness. International trade has helped bring unparalleled prosperity to the American people. It would be a tragic mistake to surrender to doubt and defeatism just when our prospects are looking so bright. I have confidence in America, and I'm sure you do too. Until next week, thanks for listening, and God bless you.
Does that sound like a guy who really liked using tariffs? No. Did he use tariffs? On some occasions. Those on the tariff side of the argument and the neo-populist or nationalist populist camp, MAGA camp, some of them trying to defend Trump, they're saying, oh, Ronald Reagan used tariffs. He loved tariffs. BS. He did use tariffs in a limited way for motorcycles in 1983. That's because he was trying to protect Harley Davidson. Because companies like Yamaha, Honda, they were dumping product into the U.S. or were accused of it. And he imposed strict or heavy tariffs of about 45% in like 1983. And I remember in school, high school, one of my teachers talking about that very thing, saying, you know, the Japanese are killing us with kindness. If you buy a Harley Davidson and you try to start it, it's probably going to squirt oil all over you, and you have to kickstart the thing 15 times before it actually fires up. And it rumbles, and or you buy a Honda and you turn the key and it goes, vroom, starts first time every time. And he said, yeah, they're killing us with kindness. Yeah, they were. They were killing the economy with kindness because they were building better products and people were buying those because they lasted longer. They were easier to start, easier to maintain. They ran better. They were much more refined. And the tariffs protected companies like Harley Davidson. And they needed big companies to do that. And they protected the auto industry. And I talked about that with tariffs and what they called voluntary export restraints in like the early 1980s. There was the semiconductor agreement, which then they accused Japan of violating. And that led to the speech that we just heard from 1987. There were textile and apparel quotas. And that's because the United States, just like Canada, on the textile industry, which is the production of things like clothing, could not compete because the price points on the clothing, the labor, it was labor intensive, especially at that time. There wasn't nearly as much automation. So he imposed some tariffs in that regard. And it worked for a while, but in the end, almost all of it has now left the United States and certainly Canada. Clothing, look at the tag on any garment you buy. Is any of it made here? No, very, very little. Very few things. And in 88, there were tariffs placed on some lumber products coming from Canada. And steel and aluminum, they've always been targeted as well, especially during the Reagan era, though, on like Europe and Japan. Now China, accused of dumping steel. And it's a national security issue on the U.S. side. So there's maybe some justification for that. And so too with energy. You have to make sure you have lots of energy. And that's why they have the strategic oil reserves and things of that nature. And I remember as a kid, there was an old show called Lou Grant, spinoff from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, sort of. But Ed Asner played Lou Grant, newspaper editor at a Los Angeles newspaper. I used to watch that all the time. I suppose maybe that had some influence over my decision to go into media later in life. But I remember there was a whole episode where they talked about the lumber tariffs, and they were complaining in this episode in the script about the high cost of the paper that they used to print their newspaper every day. And the one guy that Lou Grant, the lead star, was talking to the I don't remember the guy's name, but they were going on about that was becoming, the cost of paper was too high because of the tariffs. That was in the 80s. So these are not new things. They're just history rhyming. And even before the 80s, tariffs controversial, used as a tool at times, and we haven't seen this to this level since the Great Depression. And we've heard references made to the Smoot-Hawley tariff. That goes back to 1930 when it was signed into law, where U.S. tariffs were imposed on over 20,000 imported goods to levels that had never been previously seen before. Average tariffs at that time were around 45 to 50% on dutiable imports. The goal was to protect American industries and farmers from foreign competition. They saw that as a way to boost domestic production and preserve jobs amid the economic collapse that began with the stock market crash in 29. And those who believed in the higher tariffs, they thought it would encourage Americans to buy domestic goods, thereby stimulating the economy. However, didn't quite work out that way at all. The U.S. economy was already in decline, and with falling demand, rising unemployment, and a collapsing banking system, things were not going well. Policy makers at the time hoped that tariffs would shield struggling sectors like agriculture in particular. It started there, and manufacturing from cheaper foreign goods, especially from Europe and Canada, where in certain sectors, workers or industry in those countries had comparative advantage. But in the end, the tariffs ended up prolonging the Great Depression. The Smoot-Hawley tariff triggered widespread retaliation from trading partners. Canada, Britain, others imposed their own tariffs on U.S. goods, severely restricting American exports. What's Trump doing now? Imposing the tariffs. That's making the United States the most expensive place to do business, because every item on which a tariff is imposed becomes an input into every other item, which is something Trump doesn't quite grasp, nor did Maria Bartiromo from Fox News. I don't think I pronounced her name right. When we ran her clip earlier saying that if Trump loses in court and the tariffs are deemed unconstitutional, the tariff money will have to be refunded to the companies that paid the tariffs when those tariffed goods came into the United States. That is true. But the companies or the individuals, the consumers that ended up buying the goods and or services down the economic line were also affected by the tariffs with higher prices. They don't get any of their money back. Back in the 30s, Canada raised tariffs on American agricultural and industrial products. It led to a sharp decline in U.S. exports. U.S. exports fell by about 50% from 1929 to 1933. You think Canada doesn't have some clout, a few cards to play? Damn right we do. These people out there, these pundits, these pro-American influencers wrapping themselves in a Canadian flag, fake patriots, they would have you believe we don't have any chance. They don't know their history. Either does Donald Trump, obviously. Look at what's happened with China. They've stopped buying all U.S. soybeans. Trump isn't providing adequate support for the soybean farmers affected by this. It's gutting the soybean agricultural sector, and he's giving a subsidy to Argentina so that they can then lower the price of their soybeans and sell them to China. And at the same time, he's talking about and is allowing an increase in the imports of beef from Argentina. And now a lot of beef producers on the U.S. side are upset. And I saw a propaganda video from a guy who says he's an American beef producer. Maybe he is, I suppose. But he's there. Oh, no, more competition from Argentina is a good thing for us. And he gave this bogus explanation saying that if they sold too many cows, they wouldn't have any left to breed. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah, the American farmers can't, they don't have enough cows to sell. That's why they have to import them from Argentina. Thanks, Donald Trump, for saving the cattle industry. No, that you look, the farmers are up in arms over this. Back in the 30s, the retaliatory tariffs that were implemented contributed to a global trade war, and that's what we're getting into now. It caused international trade to plummet. World trade volume declined by almost 70%, 65 to 70% between 1929 and 1934. And the collapse reduced economic activity just worldwide as countries became more insular, deepening the global depression. That's the thing with Trump. Yeah, you might reshore some of your production. You might bring more factories to the United States, but you're not going to be exporting. Not anywhere near what you were exporting before. You're going to get shrinkage. You may get people working in all these different sectors. You might create more jobs, but you're going to increase costs, increase the need to pay people more. You're going to become very closed through your protectionism. And as a result, the world's largest economy will only shrink. China is laughing at Donald Trump tonight. The problem for Canada is that we're right on the US doorstep, and they're basically signaling to us, don't you dare do more trade with China. And that's why Carney doesn't talk about China. He talks about Europe. So we have to go there. So our case is very unique because of our juxtaposition vis-a-vis the United States. That's why they're also telling us, buy the F-35, not the Gripen. You must buy our fighter jet. That's why we didn't build the Avro Arrow. There was a lot of stories about this. Pressure from the U.S. side for Canada to not build that fighter jet. They didn't want the competition, and they didn't want what they viewed as some sort of threat to their economy and maybe even their national security from a neighbor to the north. Even though we've always been a very reliable trading and defense partner. Trump wants us to be part of the Golden Dome, defense dome, that wants to take over the country. I don't know. Things just aren't sitting right. Higher tariffs in the 30s increased the cost of imported goods. They raised prices for consumers and businesses in the U.S., and that reduced purchasing power back at that time when demand was already weak. Industries that were reliant on imported raw materials faced higher costs. That led to reduced production and layoffs, further worsening unemployment, and that became really pronounced, I think, at a peak around 1933. And then you had tariffs undermining international economic cooperation. Countries turned to protectionism rather than collaborative solutions. Everybody's fighting. It's a war. Everybody's losing. The entire world economy is shrinking. It delayed recovery efforts globally, and global markets became more fragmented. And then the decline in trade also reduced foreign earnings, making it harder for countries to repay debts after World War I, and that strained international financial systems, and that actually helped contribute, I think, in many respects, to the rise of Nazism in Germany, and we got World War II as a result of all of that. And that is why economics, in many respects, is so important, because it has such an impact on the daily lives of people. It can become so disruptive. It can impose such pain or prosperity on people to the point where it can create the conditions for a war. And what's Bannon talking about? A civil war. My God, as this revolution is taking place, if you're actually sitting there talking about the possibility of an actual civil war, and then just in some sort of denial that what you're doing is not harmful, that it's actually a good thing, maybe you better rethink everything, man. You need to take off your blinders, step back for a moment and say, hey, maybe the way we're approaching this is not beneficial. The tariffs are contributing to a lot of this. The combination of reduced exports in the 30s, higher import costs, declining global demand, it created this vicious cycle. As economies contracted, demand for goods and services fell further, prolonging the depression. You know, for an example, U.S. agricultural exports dropped significantly, hurting farmers who were already struggling with low prices and overproduction. That's what you have in the United States now. Overproduction for sure, because now they can't export their products to China, which has been a major consumer. And that's hurting the middle class. That's hurting middle America. That's hurting flyover country. That's hurting the MAGA base. But as long as you are lying about things, telling everybody that everything is great, that goes on for a while until somebody can't pay their bills. And then they get a huge wake-up call. Maybe too late. So generally, economists agree, and I mean generally and very widely, that the Smoot-Hawley tariff did not cause the Great Depression, but significantly worsened and prolonged it. And the initial economic collapse was driven by factors like the stock market crash, bank failures, declining consumer confidence, which we have right now, thank you, Mr. Trump, because of all the instability. But the protectionist policies at that time that came after those things, that amplified all of the problems and prolonged them. So there have been many studies done, and it's estimated that as a result of those tariffs back in the 30s, gross domestic product in the U.S. declined by about 2%, and global trade by an even larger margin than that. It contributed to the depth and the duration of the economic crisis, the depression at the time. This is the path we are on. Go back, learn from Milton Friedman. Go back, learn from Ronald Reagan. You will learn from the economists through history who have learned from the Great Depression that the Smoot-Hawley tariff is often cited as a tale of caution against protectionism during economic downturns, and this economic downturn is largely the making of Donald Trump. So he's creating the crisis, telling you the solution is the tariffs. Yes, it's true that some jobs were taken in a predatory fashion, especially during the 70s and 80s, in particular the auto industry, but not so much from Canada. We were bleeding jobs too, Donald, because our industry was integrated with the US from the very beginning. We were also losing jobs to Mexico, Japan. Now, today, it's evolved into even more than that, and you're getting even countries like Vietnam producing cars, China producing cars like at a blistering rate, at prices far below what we can produce them for. That's largely because of subsidies and government intervention and involvement in their industry, artificially reducing the costs of especially their electric vehicles as they look to become the world leader in EV production. Dominating. Trying to put you out of business, dude, and you know it. But that's not us. That's not us here in Canada. We've been working with you. Our tariffs on China have been in alignment with the United States. We're not your enemy, man. We're your ally. We're your trading partner. We're your cousins. But you're treating us like the enemy. That's what Reagan warned about. We're not the threat. But you are. Stop doing that. Work with us. Stop trying to dominate us. Stop trying to take us over. The Smoot-Hawley tariff was a warning sign. It's something to learn from. Donald Trump did not learn that lesson. I guess he just didn't show up that day for class when he was at the Wharton School of Finance. It was, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, that was intended to protect U.S. industries, but it backfired by sparking a global trade war, which is what we're getting into now. It reduced international trade, raised costs, deepened the economic downturn, and prolonged the Great Depression. Now, I keep saying, I've said this tonight, don't worry, going to be okay. We're going to make it. This is a bluff because Trump needs Canada far more than he's letting on. I'm not the only one. Now, Kevin O'Leary, I like him and I don't like him sometimes. I agree with what he says sometimes, other times not. Here tonight on Fox News, he's saying he thinks this is all noise. He wants signal, and he's not tuning in to Donald Trump's channel.
Was it smart for the government, the Ontario government, to produce this ad?
What's the difference between this tiff between Canada and the United States and what's going on with China, where one day it's going to be a 10-15% tariff, and then they impose a rare earth issue, and bang, it's 100%, and the meeting's turned off, and now 48 hours later it's back on. This is just a negotiation. That's all it is.
Yep.
You know, the thing about Trump that people still don't get, and I'm amazed after all these years, if you're an investor like I am, you have to shut out the noise and focus on the signal. So what is the signal that Trump is putting out? Because I don't make money on noise. I make money understanding signal, which is policy. What's going on here, the two biggest negotiations that matter most are the one with China, the world's second largest economy, and the one going on with Canada, the geo-locked behemoth north with all the resources, the power, the rare earth, the lumber, the water. They have unlimited supplies of that right beside the largest economy on earth, the United States. Where are we going long term? And this is the investor in me just thinking this through, listening to Trump, listening to Carney, listening to Ford. Where are we going to be in 10 years? We're going to combine these economies one way or another. Why? Because we have to do that to become the largest economy on earth, to be able to spend 3.5 to 5% GDP defending the North, where the Chinese are knocking on the door. Anybody that doesn't understand the intentions of the Chinese government over the next decade is dreaming. They want to become the world's largest economy, and they want world dominance, both militarily and economically. The only way that's going to stop is Canada gets together with the United States, creates a behemoth economy, a behemoth, and says the Chinese, don't beep with us. In Taiwan or anywhere else, we have the largest spend, because we're going to spend 3.5 to 5% GDP on just defense. Don't mess with us or it'll be a bad outcome. The Russians are a sideshow up northern Canada compared to what the Chinese are going to do. That's the long term. So if you're an investor, you go long Canada now. I haven't touched Canada for a decade because it was ruled by the idiot king, and now he's gone. The new guy sounds a lot smarter. So I'm going long the Canadian dollar, buying Canadian land, buying Canadian energy, because they're going to win with the lowest cost power for data centers up there. So I'm listening to the signal, not the noise.
What did I tell you? Where was O'Leary with Danielle Smith, Premier of Alberta? He was down there at Mar-a-Lago during the election and after. How many times did he go down there? Anyway, he was down there with her. And what were they talking about? Exactly what he's talking about there, about data centers. He wants to set up an AI facility there. He's heavily invested, wants to do that in Alberta. Danielle Smith has talked about it. They want to do it there because of energy. They have oil, and they are building these mini modular nuclear reactors. They also announced, I think it was $2 billion. I think that's right, this past week, where they're going to build one here in Ontario as well, maybe more than one. Energy, man. That's what Carney's talking about too. Making Canada an energy superpower. That includes nuclear. And O'Leary saying what I've been saying exactly as well. O'Leary, a conservative, and he's saying that the new guy, Carney, is a lot smarter than the idiot king, the worst prime minister in Canadian history, Justin Trudeau. I agree. Carney is a much smarter guy, and he's a much better guy to have at the helm there. Now, where's Poilievre in all of this? Well, I think he's floundering, trying to find his footing. That's a whole other ball of wax. You can hate me all you want just because I don't just sit here and knee-jerk reaction, just automatically F Carney every night. That's not what I do. I look at the whole bigger picture and I'm like, does that make sense? Is this right? Is that wrong? Is this going to benefit Canada? Is this a good thing for the country, for the people? Is he lying or telling the truth? Where are these economic policies likely to take us? I don't care which party it comes from. I'm telling you, Carney's more of a conservative than Poilievre is in his fiscal, his fiscal policies, his economic policies. You just read the housing plan; it's more market oriented than Poilievre's. Sorry to tell you, it's just true. Whatever. Oh, Rick, you're a liberal. No, not really. And these political ideologies bleed over one into the other from party to party. It's all nuanced, just like the tariffs and the use of tariffs. That's kind of where we're at tonight. David Eby, the Premier of British Columbia, I believe he, like Ford is saying, he's going to take that ad down after this weekend, after the World Series. By the way, speaking of the World Series, Los Angeles Dodgers tonight won, Toronto Blue Jays nothing at the end of the second inning. Just to keep you updated. World Series. And this story about the tariffs making headlines around the world. Here's Times Radio out of England. This is the Associate Professor of Law at Queen's University, Ontario, being interviewed. This is Nicholas Lamp on Times Radio. Let a little of this roll tonight to get his reaction to this. Nicholas Lamp.
It does represent what Reagan generally thought.
Despite a warming or a thawing in terms of relations over recent months, Donald Trump last night announced that he was now going to put a stop to all these trade talks between America and Canada. Why? Well, it's an advert paid for by the Ontario government and airing in American cities that criticises the American president over his trade tariffs. Now, the advert features another American president, darling of the right, Ronald Reagan. Let's have a listen.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
Imagine the merging of trusted.
Here we go. I need 15 seconds here. Coming back, coming back. Please stand by. Standing by as we get back to the content. Here we go.
Stushy. Now, Donald Trump has decried the advert as fake. And interestingly, the Ronald Reagan Foundation insists that it misrepresents an address given by Ronald Reagan, who, of course, was the 40th president. That speech was apparently given back in 1987. And Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has addressed the matter just a few minutes ago. Let's have a listen.
We stand ready to pick up on that progress and build on that progress when the Americans are ready to have those discussions, because it will be for the benefit of workers in the United States, workers in Canada, and families in both of our countries. Now, what we can control, absolutely, is how we build here at home. And that's the focus of Budget 2025, generational investment here in Canada. And what we can also control, or at least heavily influence, is developing new partnerships and opportunities, including with the economic giants of Asia, which is the focus of this trip.
Well, let's now speak to...
And so Carney not panicking, not even really extending an olive branch at this point. He knows what this is. This is just Trump saying what he's saying today, and everything is likely to change tomorrow.
Nicholas Lamp. Nicholas is Associate Professor of Law at Queen's University in Ontario. Hello, Nicholas. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the White House is saying this advert is fake, and the Reagan Foundation says that it's misrepresentative of Reagan's views on tariffs. What's the truth about this? Do you think that there has been a bit of spin with this, using this clip of Ronald Reagan?
Well, there's no doubt that these are actually Reagan's words, and there's also no doubt that he was a convinced free trader. He made those remarks in the context where he was actually announcing some restrictions on Japanese cars coming in, but it's something that Reagan was very uncomfortable with, and so he wanted to make it clear that he was not on board with erecting protection. So I think, even though obviously this was edited, it does represent what Reagan generally thought.
And the Ronald Reagan Foundation is saying that they're now reviewing legal options in terms of using this clip. Do you think they have a case at all, the foundation?
No.
Well, I don't know exactly what the status of the copyright is regarding these remarks, but given that there's something that the U.S. president said, it should be in the public domain, right? Everybody should be able to use it. But I think what it just shows is the climate of fear, right? So the Reagan Foundation clearly is worried about backlash from President Trump. But there can be no doubt that President Trump's trade policy is a fundamental shift from what Reagan was pursuing, and that Reagan would be horrified to see the course that the United States has taken in its trade policy.
Let's turn our attention now on what happens now in terms of trade talks between Canada and America. What do you think will happen now, and what do you think the damage could be if these trade talks are off?
Well, I think there's not going to be great damage because the trade talks were already not going anywhere. So it was already there wasn't a great prospect for major progress. And the reason is that Canada is actually in a relatively good position compared to other countries. Most 85% of Canadian exports still enter the United States duty-free. But the remaining ones where you still have tariffs are the really hard sectors. It's cars, it's steel and aluminum. These are the sectors that President Trump really cares about, and that's why we were unable to make progress in the negotiations anyway.
And, you know, we've got these Canadian political adverts being played in American cities. Is that usual for Canadian political adverts to be played in America?
It's happened before in the context of the trade war, but we have to be very mindful about who is playing these ads. This is not the Canadian federal government. This is the Ontario government, and specifically the Ontario Premier Doug Ford. And you have to keep in mind that Doug Ford is himself a bit of a mini Trump. Like, he has been trying to use the trade war to enhance his own profile. He's been making very controversial suggestions all throughout the trade war. For example, he suggested that we should pursue a deal with the U.S. without Mexico, which wasn't coordinated with the federal government. He has tried to cut off electricity exports to the United States and then quickly had to backtrack when Trump increased tariffs as a result. And so he's been playing his own role, which was definitely not coordinated with the federal government. And we have to keep in mind Ontario is a bit desperate because the auto industry, which is concentrated in Ontario, is really suffering from the U.S. tariffs. We had two really shocking announcements this past week. One was that Stellantis was going to build a new model in Indiana instead of in Ontario, and that a GM plant would stop manufacturing an electric van here. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that Ontario is kind of lashing out in this way, but this is not reflective of Canada's overall approach to the negotiations with the U.S.
And do you think Mark Carney will be able to sort of, because it felt like the relations with him and Donald Trump got a lot better, but do you think he'll be able to sort of try and, you know, get back into negotiations with Donald Trump, or what do you think he'll feel about that?
Well, I think Mark Carney will just, as he said in his statement, he'll just wait and try to pick up the progress, such as it was once Trump has calmed down. I think this is something that we've had previous moments where negotiations were suspended. This is just Trump's style of leadership. It's like a mafia boss, right? So if you do anything to displease the big boss, you can expect to get hit. And so I think that, of course, while this is not helpful, the federal government is not going to get too fussed about it, because after a few weeks, I think this will blow over.
One of our listeners has just messaged in saying the difference is Reagan was against tariffs to protect jobs. Trump is using them to repatriate jobs. What do you think about that statement from one of our listeners, Nicholas?
Well, that's definitely true. So Trump has a fundamentally different view about the effectiveness of tariffs in bringing back jobs to the United States. But one would say that I think if you look at the broader trade establishment in the United States, the consensus has shifted away from Reagan. So the idea that Reagan had, that as long as you keep trade open, it will help American workers, that's something that very few people would support in the United States nowadays, even establishment Republicans. And that's simply because of the experience of Chinese import competition, something called the China shock, which has had some devastating impact on U.S. manufacturing communities. So if Trump was a bit more confident, he would say, well, what Reagan said may have seemed true at the time, but it's no longer true, and we know it's not true, and therefore we're pursuing a different policy.
All right. Different times, but economics is a form of science, but as such, you have to understand that the laws of nature actually do apply. And while you can artificially manipulate things for a while, what goes up still must come down. That the laws of supply and demand are, in fact, laws. And so you can deny nature for only so long. And tariffs are an artificial tool. The consequences of using them usually result in unintended consequences. As such consequences are usually negative. And we've seen that play out in history. Stay with me. We're going to get into the final leg of this on the other side of this.
Brightleaf Innovations is excited to offer our newest investment opportunity, the Turn Easy Bed Storage Solution.
Turns with a touch, spins
push it, you don't search anymore. Turn easy bed, spin your world around. Storage made simple, the best you found. Shelves your way, keep the mess away. Charge it, store it, night or day. Custom shelves for your books or your tech. Cozy space for your treasures to protect. Built-in power when you need to recharge. Smart design that makes your bedroom feel large. Turn easy bed, spin your world around. Storage made simple, the best you found. Shelves your way, keep the mess away. Charge it, store it, night or day.
Designed and developed by Brightleaf Innovations. Proudly Canadian and patent pending in North America. Turn Easy Bed transforms how you live.
To learn more about this innovative new product idea and exciting investment opportunity, call 519-784-0222 or visit brightleafinnovations.com.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, also tonight, Maverick Midnight Matinee follows Maverick News. We have a pretty unique presentation tonight. I'm going to run a contest again. If you can guess tonight's feature presentation, I will ship you a t-shirt. The clues are, it was a television program pilot, 1958. It was a science fiction drama. And what else can I give you as a couple of clues here? Let me think about it. It dealt with Cold War paranoia. You guess this one, I'll send you a free Maverick News or Exile the Knights of Malta or a Trump Fight t-shirt in the mail. I'll look for guesses in the chat. And that's coming up very shortly as we now get into some final comments tonight on whether this is a bluff. And I think it is, in a very real sense, a bluff from Trump. It is, or appears to be, a high-stakes bluff. It's classic negotiation theater designed to extract concessions rather than a genuine policy shift. And here's why I think that that's what we're looking at. And I think Kevin O'Leary has realistically pegged this in that context. Within hours of Trump's post, Doug Ford has announced that Ontario would pause the ad campaign effective Monday after airing during the World Series weekend for maximum visibility. So not really bending the knee. We're still running it during the World Series. Ford is framing this as a gesture to resume trade talks after consulting with the prime minister, and I still think there's some good cop, get bad cop being played here. And the swift concession suggests that Trump's outburst achieved its goal, neutralizing the ads without formal escalation. But Carney echoed readiness to pick up where we left off, but not really conceding anything or bending the knee either. I think that Doug Ford actually did emerge victorious here in that he delivered the message in an effective way. He took a shot across Trump's bow, showed that he's not afraid, and also giving Trump an opportunity to kind of, through social media, snap back or clap back at this, I guess. But Ford delivered his message to the American people, to the Canadian people. Now Trump has just amplified all of that to a level that they never would have achieved, even spending all $75 million on the ad campaign. So he's got now all this free publicity, and he has us sitting here talking about tariffs, how they work, explaining in much more detail. And the public in general is becoming more educated on this economic issue. And I think that's to the detriment of Donald Trump, because the more people truly look at it in depth, the more people will realize that basically he's the one taking Ronald Reagan out of context. And all of this mirrors Trump's earlier tactics back in 2018, 2019, which I also highlighted for you in that Rush Limbaugh clip, where he also nailed Trump's tactics, saying that this is really an attempt to put pressure on Canada and Mexico heading into these negotiations. Back then it was NAFTA, now it's USMCA. Same thing, same scenario, just a different time period. And Trump uses the words terminating, but full termination of a trade deal or all trade with Canada would just be way too harmful for the United States. It's a bluff. There's $2.6 billion in trade crossing the border every day between Canada and the United States. This would raise prices like crazy. And I know that I just saw in the chat people like, well, how did Canada's inflation get to where it is? Why are we paying so much? Why are groceries so expensive? That's for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because, like all governments, including the United States, Canada printed too much money, especially during the pandemic, gave out too much free income to people, while productivity declined because they locked people down and prevented a lot of people from going to work. Less supply of demand, less supply of product, no decline in demand means higher prices. And it's taking time, or took time, for that to filter through the system. We're still paying for that, although the rate of inflation has come down. Prices overall still remain too high. But over time, as we go through hopefully a period of economic recovery, prices will come down. But as Donald Trump injects all this disruption and uncertainty into the economy, you're reducing investment. People don't know. People are pulling back. This is reducing economic activity between both of our countries and even globally, and that is also contributing to high prices. But to pin all of that simply just on Doug Ford or David Eby or the Liberal government or anybody else, keeping in mind that Ford is actually a conservative and even described by that economist from Queen's University as a mini Trump in Canada by some. It's not really fair, for lack of a better word, to sort of pin all the blame on Canada's politicians. Although they did sort of fall into the trap, didn't they? Because during the pandemic, I warned. I said, don't do this. You can go back. I said it. I'm on record. Don't print all this money. Don't give all this stuff away. Don't lock us down. It's an economic disaster. I was actually surprised. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the Canadian economy was as resilient as it was back then. We survived it, and I wasn't sure we would. It got so crazy. So much money was being printed, so much government spending was happening, and you saw so many people in a very corrupt way, in my view, just bellying up to the public trough to strap on the old feed bag and suck up as much taxpayer money in terms of research grants and other subsidies that were being put forward at the time through programs for things like COVID research into, antibodies in poultry eggs. And then you wonder why prices are so high at the grocery store. And it's largely because some people who are very corrupt give you explanations and political rhetoric and narratives that turn reality upside down and inside out and confuse the hell out of you and me sometimes. But there's no way Donald Trump is simply going to end trade deals with Canada. There's way too much at stake, way too much suffering the United States would go through. As much as Canada might suffer, the United States would suffer too. And he would just lose the support of people. You've got Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, privately urging Canada to drop retaliatory moves like the alcohol ban and so on. Okay, well, you got to do something to push back against this insanity, economic insanity. And the ad, I don't blame Doug Ford for running that. And Donald Trump himself said if he were in the same position, if he were in Doug Ford's shoes, he would run it too. Oops. Kind of spoke too much truth there, didn't he? And there's been, at this point, no executive orders, White House briefings, or congressional notifications that have materialized as a result of Donald Trump and his, that's it, we're just cutting off all trade talks with Canada. Yeah, today. And, Trump does talk about national security, World Trade Organization. That came after GATT and the General Agreement on Trade, tariffs and trade. And he's been using that loophole in USMCA, the national security loophole, in order to use these tariffs. But hey, you know what? You just wait for that Supreme Court case, which is coming up. And that's really why he was so upset, because Doug Ford running that ad came just before he has to go to the Supreme Court and defend his position on these tariffs, which are frankly unconstitutional because they are government overreach and they reach right into the sovereignty, if you will, or the authority or jurisdiction of states, because he's dictating economic policy at every level, including the state level, using a tool that goes far beyond his scope of jurisdiction as president. This leveraging, provocation for leverage, political leverage, not just economic leverage, but it's really political leverage, is a skirmish in an ongoing trade war. Just another salvo. Just another phase, another chapter. If it's not a bluff, we'll see tariffs hiked or USMCA panels invoked by week's end. And beyond that, it's just posturing. And given what we're seeing tonight, I haven't seen anything else as a result of this. So it's in the news cycle today. It'll probably be gone in a couple of days. And we're going to be on to the next thing. So expect negotiations to resume soon. Canada probably toning down the public jabs. Trump will claim victory, but in fact, Ford came out on top in this one because he got all this free publicity. And I don't know exactly how the contracts read with the U.S. broadcasters that have been running that ad. Canceling it early, will Ontario get some money back? Very likely, or it'll be repurposed for some other kinds of ads, maybe tourism ads or something. Who knows? We'll have to investigate that and get across that bridge when we get to it. But no, a ton of free publicity here as a result. So Trump doing Doug Ford a favor and Canada by talking about this, posting so aggressively on social media and getting all this media attention on both sides of the border focused on it and around the world. And that's the way it is on this October 24th, 2025. Stay with me. We're going to come back on the other side and talk about tonight's Maverick Midnight Matinee.
Maverick News. Fighting for freedom.
Yeah, in another way too, it just shows how Trump is just a big suck. He can dish it out, but he can't take it. He couldn't take having that ad run, so he had to attack it, smear it, have his team discredit it, claim that it was taken out of context when it clearly was not. What a wuss. And it shows that he doesn't believe in free speech, because you're not allowed to say that. That's cheating. He says it's cheating. I mean, it's the kind of language that you would get from a 6-year-old. It's pathetic. And it shows that he's a lot weaker than he wants you to believe. He's very, very, very vulnerable. Canada, we're not nearly as big, but we still pack a lot of punch because we're so integrated with the United States already. And we don't want to hurt the U.S. We just want to coexist and do things that are mutually beneficial. Now, into the chat I go. Anybody have any idea what tonight's movie is? Any guesses? I haven't seen any. I'm in on the main Rumble channel tonight. Any idea? So it's from 1958. Science fiction. Any guesses? Oh my God, Sharon. She got the movie. Now is Tomorrow. How the hell did you do that? This thing's pretty obscure. You email me, Sharon, and I will send you a t-shirt. You just tell me what size you want and which shirt you would like, and I will send it to you via Canada Post. Should be there in a couple of years. Just email me here, maverickmultimedia@mail.com. There you go. You send me your snail mail address, and you're going to be the proud owner of a Maverick t-shirt. You can have it in any color you want, as long as it's black. Okay, so yeah, Now is Tomorrow. That's going to be tonight's Maverick Midnight Matinee presentation. But before we get there, I'm going to leave you tonight. And I'm doing this because I have to sign out of YouTube. They don't like us running these movies over there. So no YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube tonight, and those channels are growing, by the way, so thank you to everyone over there for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Costs you nothing to do that, but benefits us greatly. Helps to get around that algorithm and the shadow banning and all of the other things they do to suppress the channels as we continue our pursuit of truth, or at least our efforts to get you closer to the truth through our journalism and multimedia presentations. So as we do that, I'm going to leave you with this from Maverick and the News Brothers, Trump traitors. And I will see you on the flip side in just a moment for Maverick Midnight Matinee on Rumble, Twitch, and other regular affiliated Maverick News platforms. I'll be right back.
Didn't pick this fight, but here it came. Now I wanna play in a traitor's game. They sell us out for a tax cut deal. Shake his hand while they rob and steal. They call us blind, they call us weak, but they're the ones on their knees to the thief. Wave our flag while they burn it down, marching to the sound of a tyrant's cry. Patriots, they're bought and sold. Traitors his boots while they put on a show. They chant his name, raise their fists up high, while the real ones fight to keep us alive. They don't fight fair, they twist the truth, say they're the future, but they kill the roots. They laugh now, but watch them run when the north wind howls and justice comes. Traitors, selling us out, burning our home for a tax break now. They stand with the wolves, spit on the brave, but they'll beg for Canada when it's in its grave. One day soon, the tide will turn, and traitors pay when the fires burn. No statues raised, no banners flown, just names in dust where the traitors roam. Traitors, selling us out, burning our home for a tax break now. They stand with the wolves, spit on the brave, but they'll beg for Canada when it's in its grave. Trump traitors! Trump traitors! Trump traitors! Trump traitors! Trump traitors! Shame.
We are back. It is time for Maverick Midnight Matinee. So get your popcorn, get your beverage, get settled in. This is not a real long one tonight, but it's an oldie but a goodie, and it is sort of obscure. So here we go, Maverick Midnight Matinee. Okay, you Maverick Midnight Matinee maniacs, welcome back. I still need to end this one. If you're watching on YouTube, you now have to leave and join us over on Rumble or one of the other platforms where we are streaming, because we can't run these movies on YouTube. And here we go. Goodbye, YouTube 1.